Hi, and welcome back to another one of our online lectures here in World History. Today we're going to continue our unit on French Absolutism, Enlightenment, and Revolution by looking at the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment really was known as the Age of Reason. It really gets people to think in a new way and challenge authority with their minds and really call for change. So we've got one constructive response question we're going to seek to answer by looking at today's lecture. The question says, generalize what the Enlightenment was and describe at least two of the key contributors. Well, we're definitely going to tell you all about what the Enlightenment is and give you a good definition of it. But then we're going to talk about several of the key writers who provided excellent ideas during the Enlightenment that helped bring a spur on change that ultimately helped lead to the French Revolution. So we're going to have several examples from which we're going to choose from. So what are we going to learn? Like I said, we're going to look at what is the Enlightenment. We're going to talk about a guy named Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and their kind of differing views on government. And then we're going to look at the philosophers, which will provide several specific examples of different writers, such as Mary Wollstonecraft and Voltaire, who wrote about different changes or injustices that they would like to see changed. So we will have multiple examples that we can use by the end of this. So let's set the stage. Definitely we have to talk about the Renaissance and the Reformation, because the Renaissance, as we know, is a rebirth in many things, and one of the things it's a rebirth in is education. So we have a rebirth of learning and the arts. And when you have that, you get an inspiration or a new inspired curiosity of many different fields. So when learning happens, it kind of becomes, in a way, kind of like a domino effect, because once you start learning something, you want to learn something else, and it continues and goes and goes and goes. And so we definitely have to give some credit to the Renaissance for being a big part of why the Enlightenment happens at all. Scholars began to question ideas that had been accepted for hundreds of years. I always suggest in my classes that education allows you to say no. It allows you to question things. Without an education, you blindly follow your authority, and that can be very, very scary, especially if the person you're following is either not morally responsible or certainly trying to hurt his or her people. So once we can question things, we can start improving things. And again, that's definitely dating back to the Renaissance here. The Reformation's a part of this as well, because the Reformation prompted religious followers to challenge accepted ways of thinking about God and salvation. And Martin Luther definitely should come to mind in that story. There's no doubt that the Renaissance helped spurs on the Reformation. Both definitely involve questioning things. And certainly the Reformation, we saw questioning of the Catholic Church, which led to the break between Catholics and Protestants. So all of that's going to fit in here. So let's talk about the Enlightenment. Not only did new ways of thinking apply to science, but were also applied to all aspects of society, including government, religion, economics, and education. Because one of the things you saw mentioned on the previous slide, it said the scientific revolution. Well, the scientific revolution is an extension of the Renaissance. This is where we get new lines of thinking in science, Isaac Newton and the laws of motion and gravity, Copernicus with his heliocentric theory saying the sun is at the center of the solar system, not the Earth, and a lot of accepted practices and theories that we have today. So that's why I say not only does this apply to science, but it also applies to everything else. The Enlightenment's going to be that everything else piece, especially when we look at questioning government. So all of this new ways of thinking, all this change that's going to occur spurs on the Enlightenment. What is the Enlightenment? Here's our definition. The Enlightenment is a new intellectual movement that stressed reason and thought and the power for individuals to solve problems. Now, as you're writing that down, think of it this way. Reason and thought. Whatever the problem is, if it's something in, let's say your locker's jammed, or you're missing your math book, or you can't find your cell phone, if you automatically jump to conclusions, oh, somebody stole it, or my locker is jammed because of aliens, you're not using reason and thought. if we jump to conclusions, we don't solve problems. Now, if we use reason and thought, go, okay, where did I last use my cell phone? Or what could possibly be in my locker that's jamming it? Or, maybe I lent my math book to somebody. Now I'm reasoning things out. I'm thinking about it. I'm trying to come up with a solution. It's a power of the individual to solve problems. Think about that, because that's how we operate on a daily basis. At least that's how I hope we operate on a daily basis. But throughout history, especially uneducated people, they didn't have this type of power within their brains. It hadn't been realized yet. They hadn't been trained to use their brains this way. One of the easiest answers for any question would be God did it. Why is the grass green? Well, God made it green. Why is the sky blue? God made it blue. And I'm not saying that that's not true, especially for you who really believe in that, but there's scientific properties that make the grass green and the sky blue and things like that. And we can reason and think them out, and we can study them. So this requires a lot of explanation, because we take for granted the way we think today. However, not everybody in history has had the opportunity to use their brains in the same manner that we do in 2015. So I just want you to make sure you understand that this really is a big deal. Now, this picture is a little blurry, but here's some of the ideas of the Enlightenment. You can see the ability to reason is what makes humans unique. You don't see your dog or your cat reasoning things out. If they get scared, they run away. If they, are content, they'll stay. But there's not a lot in between. They might sniff around, might use their senses to try to figure things out, but they're not really, going to be able to logically and sequentially put things together like humans can. Reason can be used to solve problems and improve people's lives. Reason can free people from ignorance, superstition, and unfair government. Boy, I wish we could star that one. I know it's not on your notes, but I wish we could really star that one. The natural world is governed by laws that can be discovered through reason. This is where we need to channel our inner Sheldon from the Big Bang Theory and any other physicists out there. The natural world, what goes up must come down. That's gravity. Laws of motion. What is put in motion will stay in motion until another force acts on it. The natural world has physical laws, and we can discover them by studying them. The ideas of the Enlightenment are going to give us all sorts of logical ways of looking at the world, the same logical things that we use on a daily basis today. This is a little flow chart. I'm going to let you pause this and take a look at it. I'm just going to give you a quick overview. I did mention the scientific revolution and the heliocentric theory. This spurs on the Enlightenment, which spreads ideas, eventually leads to the American Revolution, which eventually leads to the French Revolution. And of course, a lot of this starts with the Renaissance. So I'm not going to read this all to you, but you can see kind of a natural progression of how ideas in science and logic really shape people's minds, really from, you could date back even to the early Renaissance of 1300 all the way to 1789 when the French Revolution starts. So, this took some time to happen. Okay, so we had talked about in your constructive response question, there's going to be a part where you need to include key contributors to the Enlightenment. And Thomas Hobbes is an interesting one. Thomas Hobbes had a very unique view on government. And I think there's going to be some people who agree with this today. I tend to be a little bit more of an optimist, but I can see where he's coming from. So Thomas Hobbes suggested that all humans are naturally selfish and wicked, and we need a strong ruler to govern us. Well, I mean, when you look at what's going on in the world, that sometimes you kind of go, yeah, I can see there's people getting shot and getting robbed. There's bad stuff that happens out there. I wouldn't go as far as saying that all humans are like this, but Thomas Hobbes felt like, you know what, this is why we have monarchs. This is why you have an absolute monarch system. So his suggestion was he came up with something called a social contract. So Hobbes called for a social contract, which suggested that we need a government where people agreed to give total control to a monarch because people acted in their own self-interest. It says we can't govern ourselves, so we need someone hired to do it for us. So that's why you have to have a king or queen to rule us. Obviously, the flaw here is, what if your monarch acts within their own self-interest? Then you've got an absolute monarch who's not fulfilling their goal or fulfilling their job of taking care of their people. And so that's where Hobbes had a little bit of a loophole in what he said. But this would have explained why a lot of people willfully gave power over to governments with kings and queens. We looked at Louis XIV, and certainly we'll hear about Louis XVI. They would have benefited from a social contract like this because their power allowed them to do whatever they wanted to do. So that's one Enlightenment view on government. Now, we're going to end part one there, but when we come back, I'm going to tell you about a different view on government from a writer named John Locke. And he's going to suggest something a little bit more positive that's definitely going to help us understand why the French Revolution occurs. As well as we're going to look at a few more philosophers or French writers who definitely were enlightened thinkers. So that's what we're going to look at in part two. So go ahead and hit stop here and cue up part two.